It was amusing to see the things that men took with them to war, amusing and heartbreaking. Who knows the thoughts of the soldier as he swings his duffel bag over his shoulder and sets his foot to war? Does he think of the battles ahead or of the folks behind? Is it adventure or conviction that makes him go to war? Did he become a soldier because of a private grudge? Or did some deep inner force make him take up arms in behalf of his country? A few things stand clear-cut and unassailable. When the call sounded, Canada's response was immediate. Her farms became food arsenals, and her factories forged weapons. She felt that her cause was just, and that men of goodwill required her help if freedom was to prevail on the face of the earth. For this was a nation which, compelled by no treaty, agreement, commitment, or promise, declared war on Germany September the 10th, 1939, and waged that war to the bitter, triumphant end. As the ships of the great convoys weighed anchor and cast off for the battle zones, little thought was given to the valiant, hard-working tugboats. And yet, these giants of the sea tracks, who could swallow whole regiments in their bowels, turn aside torpedoes and outrun submarines, were almost helpless in the close confines of a harbor without their unprepossessing helpmates. Truly, the great were beholden to the small. In the vast armadas which left the port of Halifax in 6 years of warfare, no troop ship was ever sunk. Much of the credit fell on the Royal Canadian Navy. For with a tin pot navy of 6 destroyers at the war's beginning, the Royal Canadian Navy emerged from the Holocaust with a proud escort fleet of 378 fighting ships. Troop ships were a legitimate target for submarines. The enemy well understood the crushing effect on the morale of a people whose men are lost at sea. But around these vital cargoes of fighting men, these precious offerings of a nation's youth, the Navy placed a moving wall of steel. Canada's manpower, her most valuable asset, was not to be lightly offered to the gods of war. On the great battle wagons were the quiet men, upon whose desks the midnight oil often shed its light, the only light they knew in the darkest of days. Men who fought the enemy and endured the hardship to preserve for the rest of mankind the heritage of freedom. The operation of Canada's merchant navy convoys, carrying the sinews of war to all parts of the globe, was of 2 classifications, freighter and troop ship. They were never mixed, for the speed of a convoy was that of its slowest ship. The strength of freighter convoys ranged from 40 to 70 ships, while the troop ships raced across the ocean highways only 4 to 7 strong. In the darker days of the war, the vast productive power of all North America was thrown into the scales. But the problem still remained of using it effectively against the enemy. Productive power, everybody knew, would win, but only if sea power could bring it to bear. The road to victory lay across the vital battleground of the Atlantic, and in those days the lowly freighter played its part, the rugged part, and played it well. Ships at sea were bitterly exposed to an enemy whom depth charges and gunfire could not subdue. For weather to the mariner was a foe every bit as deadly and unpredictable as any undersea raider. Fog was the most dreaded of these conditions for the men at sea. It brought into sharp focus the ever-present danger of collisions and hidden reefs, and the possible concealment of enemy craft. In winter, the snowstorms were just as hazardous. For the men who had to carry on, the dangers were sometimes only half visible. And so, for more than half a decade, through all kinds of weather, the merchant navy plodded on and showed the courage forever associated with Canada's senior service. But the fires of the sea gods must have sacrifices as they plot the course of war, and the gallant little ships which had gone so valiantly to battle suffered in their turn the ravages of conflict. Out in the chill, wind-swept Atlantic wastes, the little ships had found their duties, and there they discharged them. No fighters could do more. None ever did. For anyone who could listen with his eyes, these battered and broken ships spoke plainly of the sea and the men who fought on it. They told a story of men wrestling for their lives in dark, oily waters, and convoy lanes strewn with wreckage. But not all the tragedies of the sea had the gray Atlantic for a backdrop. The war was very close to the people of Halifax. Enemy submarines took their toll within sight of land. Ships were lost within the harbor itself, and Halifax sometimes wished, during the perilous months of heavy submarine attacks, that the rail seat at the spectacle could be changed for the bleachers. Her seat was costing dearly. Sometimes the shattered ships of war refused to die, and the shells and munitions that had lost their last battle were salvaged and returned once more to the fight. In war there could be no waste. All was grist for the colossus of destruction. But the men of the sea had learned a hard lesson, and even in the death throes of a ship, there might be value for the living. When the wreck was close inland, shore fishermen often became unofficial salvagers. The lifespan of a broken vessel might be moments or hours, and these frugal fishermen were not ones to give up the contents of a ship's hold to the hungry sea without a fight. Back to the little white houses on windy rocks, to their coves and glistening little villages, the shore fishermen carried their booty. They were happy with their prizes of salvage, for they had again cheated the sea. As they eagerly opened their manna from the ships, trying to ascertain the full extent of their good fortune, the salvagers gave little thought to the ways of the sea, which had taken from the many and given to the few. This has ever been the way of the sea, the seafarer, and the sea folk.